Welcome to FinScale, a podcast created by Solène Niederkorn, shedding light on innovation in finance, banking, and insurance.
Inspiration from within an extraordinary VC. Seema Amble, partner at a16z.
The reason that I've been, investing in fintech and financial services for over a decade now is because of a couple of things. One is I love the complexity. There's all these legacy actors involved, like banks and regulators, and then we interact with how painful it is to be doing payments or buying insurance as a consumer. And so you see this every day, and you see, especially when I was even sitting in private equity, you see how that there just has to be a better way to send payments, make it faster, buy insurance online, et cetera. And so I think fintech has always been really interesting. I think startups for me, and part of the reason I moved earlier stage and love doing early stage fintech, is the most fun part is working with founders and seeing companies get built and being there at really the ground floor is so magical.
In this episode, we look at the US and Europe through the lens of the fintech medium-term landscape and deep dive into what the European startup scene means to a giant US VC firm and what they look for when investing. Seema is partner at Andreessen Horowitz, the venture capital firm specializing in early-stage startups and established growth companies. Prior to this, Seema had been investing in fintechs for over a decade, primarily covering financial services with a focus on payments and insurance. It's very insightful to get Seema's fintech medium-term outlook and the importance of thinking about how much more this covers and how much more still needs to be built beyond the typical financial infrastructure. Seema has a keen eye on CFO stack and CFO tool, which give them intelligence with a real-time view of a company's financial data. Other areas to watch include AML, cyber insurance, and cross-border payments. At a16z, they want to find the most bold, ambitious entrepreneurs who are building the future through technology. And Seema shares with us the factory they have built to support the entrepreneurs. And this is, to be honest, a real source of inspiration. She also delves into companies a16z has been investing in, such as Paris-based cybersecurity insurtech Stoic, whom CEO I recently received on my French podcast, a London-based business payment company called Sequence, who have developed a B2B billing and collections solution, and a German-based startup, Rails, which is their first fintech investment in this region. You will see how the company aims to help companies manage payments and develop financial services. This podcast is for information purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment advice. Opinion expressed by Seema are solely her own and do not reflect the opinion of Andreessen Horowitz. Enjoy listening. Hi, everyone. Seema, thank you for being here and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to do this.
So I'm really excited to dig into what you do at Andreessen Horowitz and see what it means to be VC in the US and what is your interest in tech companies. But before we dive in, that would be interesting for the audience that you quickly present yourself. You give us some background information on your career and what excites you the most with startups.
Sure. Yeah, let me walk you through a little bit of my journey to get here. So right now, I'm a partner at a16z. I focus on investing in early stage fintech companies globally. So that's generally pre-seed through B, and I've got companies in Europe, the US, and Latin America right now. I started my career sort of in fintech unknowingly. I fell into it when fintech wasn't really a category. And I sort of followed my nose through jobs that I thought were interesting. And it snowballed into becoming a fintech investor almost 15 years later. But, right out of college, I started working at Blackstone, the private equity firm, right during the global financial crisis, and ended up helping out in a lot of strategic investing for the firm. So looking at how Blackstone would invest in a Brazilian PE firm called Patria at the time. We divested a few of the business lines, et cetera. And I thought, wow, this is super interesting. And then the next job I had in private equity, they were like, oh, you've looked at financial services companies. Why don't you help us invest in payments and insurance? And then I did a few more deals in what was quote unquote fintech then, which was a legacy payment processing business. And then the third job I had, they said, again, I worked at an emerging markets fintech fund called Leapfrog in South Africa. And they said, hey, I saw that you've done insurance and payments businesses. Do you want to help us launch this life insurance business in Africa and then look at some new businesses in fintech? And so that's sort of, if you can see, there's this one job built on the last, and I built up this sort of background in fintech. And so that sort of led me here. And right before I joined Andreessen, I was at a fund within Goldman Sachs that was doing venture investing. I worked on fintech. I led the Series B in a company called Voila, which is a Latin American fintech company. And then I joined Andreessen Horowitz in 2019. And it's been a fun ride of investing in early stage fintech.
So we share the same passion.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, thank you very much, Seema. What I found interesting to start with is to understand and that you share with us, what's your vision of fintech on medium term, let's say?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think, first of all, there's so much to still be built in fintech. As one of my partners said, everything is fintech. But, let me break apart. What does that really mean? And to your point, what does that mean in the medium term? So I think there are a lot of businesses in fintech and a lot of businesses that apply fintech that you may not think about. So we think of fintech as anything that sort of taps into financial infrastructure. And so that's not just neobanks or payment companies, but it's also including compliance, which you obviously know a lot about as well, or vertical software. Mm-hmm. And then it also includes things like payments, et cetera. And so our view for the medium term for fintech is there are all of these areas of fintech that still need to be built out. So things like compliance, more cross-border, there's interesting tailwinds behind it where we need to better track AML compliance and the regulation is increasing on that front. Or cross-border payments between places, whether it's between the UK, Europe, US, et cetera, there's still a lot of room for improvement there. And then things like healthcare payments. So there's all these areas of fintech that may not seem like fintech obviously, but they very much are fintech. And then to enable these businesses to be built, there's a whole layer of infrastructure that needs to be built. So whether it's allowing a healthcare payments business to be able to connect into the faster payments rails, if it's compliance software business being able to hook into the regulatory systems, all of that infrastructure needs to be built. And then the last bucket in the medium term, it's not only like being able to apply fintech to these as a horizontal across layers or the infrastructure, but there's actually a lot of the world that's still not using digital payments. So at SMBs in Europe and US, there's a large percentage of them. The vast majority is still using a lot of manual process around initiating payments, tracking their payments, keeping their books, buying insurance. All of these areas still need to be uncovered. And then I think also emerging markets or the rest of the world, I think there is an even greater need for a number of the payments areas and insurance to come online.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the way it's really expanded and developed those last 5 years is amazing. I find it so interesting. And within all the different verticals that you mentioned, which one would you consider as the most appealing right now?
One of the areas that I'm most excited, the CFO stack or CFO tools. I wrote this piece in 2020 called The CFO in Crisis. And I talk about how the CFO's role has moved from being really more accounting focused to being more strategic and being an advisor to the CEO. But that said, everything that the CFO uses or all the processes that take place as part of their team are really still, quote unquote, old school. They don't have a real-time view of a company's financial data. There's no intelligence saying, okay, here's how often people pay you on time, and here's how frequently the collections don't happen, or here's how we should be doing budgeting in a more intelligent way. And there's a number of areas that all roll into this CFO stack. So it's being able to manage payments, billing, invoicing, tax, FP&A, your ERP. All of that falls into what I would call this CFO stack. And we've seen a number of companies that have started to pop up, but I think there's still a ton more that need to be built. And there's some really, I think, interesting tailwinds, everything from, yes, the shifting role of the CFO, but, there's an increase in cross-border payments. We've also written about this idea of default global, which means companies today are starting global from day one or soon thereafter, and being able to set the company up from day one from a financial perspective, to be able to operate in multiple countries, it all would roll into this thesis of CFO tools or the CFO stack.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that the payments industry is also changing very quite fast. And there is one element that we talk a lot in Europe. And of course, you talk about it in the US. It's real-time payments. You wrote a very interesting article a few months ago, if I remember correctly. And it would be interesting that you give us a bit of information and explain maybe the differences between Europe and the US, and what could be the impact of those changes for the incumbent player in the US?
Yeah, so a couple of months ago, I wrote a little bit about FedNow, which is a real-time payments network that the US Federal Reserve System is launching. And stepping back, I think real-time payments is something that is what I would consider a basic need. You should be able to send a payment and not have to wait and wonder if it's going to clear or bounce back, and only be able to do it during business hours. It should be real time. So a number of countries, whether it's the US, Europe, Brazil, India, all these geographies have been moving towards, okay, how do we get all of the banks on board? How do we get consumers on board? How do we build out compliance so that real-time payments is possible? And as you can imagine, in each geography, there's a different system. So in the US, we've got ACH, which is our typical ACH and wires, which are most standard payment systems. But the ACH payment system it's the ACH network. So it's the Automated Clearinghouse Payment Network. That is one of the ways that you can make a payment via a bank. There's also wires. Both of these systems have been the traditional way to send payments. However, there's a lag in the amount of time for the payments to actually process, or wires you can only do during business hours. And so they're not real time. And ACH has moved towards, there's now same day ACH, but that's still not the same thing as real time. And there are limits on how much you can send. In the US, we also have RTP, which is a real-time payments network. That said, there are limitations to the real-time payments network as well. It's currently it's run by a consortium of the largest banks, but a lot of the smaller banks, for example, aren't on it. And you still need infrastructure to connect into the payment rails. So if I'm a software builder, I still need a way to initiate payments on whether it's ACH or RTP. So we've got RTP in the US, but then what I wrote about is FedNow, which is a project that the US Federal Reserve Bank has been working on and should finally launch sometime next year after many years of waiting. And it'll be interesting to see how this actually rolls out, because right now FedNow is working with a number of companies in sort of the sandbox environment. The goal is to be able to offer this to smaller banks and be another rail. But even then, you still, like as I was saying, you need infrastructure to be built on top of it. If you look at Europe and the UK, the UK, I think, has had the faster payment system since 2008. I think most banks, if not all banks in the UK, are on it. And then in Europe, you have SEPA.
Yeah.
And SEPA is great, but I would say incomplete, because unlike in the UK, where you have all of the banks in the UK on faster payments, in SEPA is only in certain banks that have adopted it, others haven't. And so when you don't have global adoption, you end up with this issue where it's incomplete and it's hard to send money to other folks because you don't know if the recipient has SEPA access. And this lack of bank adoption and fragmentation is actually quite difficult to work with. And then I think one of the other things to point out as well for both SEPA and faster payments is banks also need to get comfortable with the amount of money that's being sent, and there are limits on this, which happens in the US as well. And the third thing I'll just point out is also the banks need to then have built out like compliance and fraud controls to make all this work. Because if money is moving fast out of the accounts, that also needs to mean you're extremely sure that it's not fraudulent, both from a customer experience perspective and then also obviously from a regulatory perspective.
There is one element that you didn't mention when you presented your vision. Maybe you could clarify this point. Do you have a specific interest for hybrid fintech startups supporting the evolution of the open economy? I have received Confirm or Fiat Republic. And for instance, Fiat Republic is a banking as a service solution offered a solution for Web3 actors and marketplaces, or there is some solution offering treasury management for fiat crypto environment. Is it something that you believe in? Is it something that you follow?
I think that we're very much in the early days of what we would call Web 2.5. So it's bridging, to your point, the existing payments networks to the crypto world. And so It's exchanging money between those two and the on and off ramps. But then it's all the tools, like the CFO tools that I talked about, actually, to your point, need to be applied to crypto as well. So that's treasury management, that's accounting, that's tax. And then there's a whole layer of infrastructure from a banking as a service perspective as well that needs to be built out. Mm-hmm. And I think this is an area that's still very much in its infancy. And I think crypto has been volatile, but I think that this is a complete area that complements the existing CFO stack, and we're going to see grow over the next years.
Okay, so it's a sub vertical. You see it as a sub.
I think so. And I think we have crypto fund within Andreessen, and we work with our colleagues on thinking about things that sort of sit in between as the TradFi or the more traditional finance fintech world and crypto.
Yeah, and regarding all those topics, how do you go into each of these fields? Because it's very complicated to understand payments, to understand all the embedded finance solutions. How do you personally understand and deep dive into all those categories of fintechs?
Yeah, I think there are areas that each of us on our early stage fintech team spend time in and deep dive based on trends we see. So a large part of the job here is figuring out where are tailwinds in our ecosystem. And then a little bit of this is following your nose as you see companies start to emerge and pain points as you talk to your own portfolio or just doing research and talking to people in the ecosystem. So I can tell you about the CFO stack. Before I wrote about it, I had seen a lot of companies that I've worked with have this issue, very lacking tools, sending manual spreadsheets, Excel spreadsheets back and forth, tracking things in email. And then also big cases like the Revlon payment operations case where money is just going missing. And you're like, okay, there has to be better software built here. So part of going deep is you notice something and then you keep talking to people and understand, okay, here's the pain point and here's what it takes to succeed and build a company here. And here's how I might segment out the world. And so, yeah, it's a lot of what I would call following your nose. And yeah, a lot of times we will write content and then that'll start our thinking, share it with the world. People will give us feedback. We'll meet more companies and we're constantly trying to refine our point of view.
Impressive. Seema, you didn't really answer my question. What excites you the most with startups and fintech in particular?
Yeah, no, the reason that I've been investing in fintech and financial services for over a decade now is because of a couple of things. One is I love the complexity. There's all these legacy actors involved, like banks and regulators, and then we interact with how painful it is to be doing payments or buying insurance as a consumer. And so you see this every day, and you see, especially when I was even sitting in private equity, you see how that there just has to be a better way to send payments, make it faster, buy insurance online, et cetera. And so I think fintech has always been really interesting. I think startups for me, and part of the reason I moved earlier stage and love doing early stage fintech is the most fun part is working with founders and seeing companies get built and being there at the ground floor is so magical. And and I love being able to, in my job as an investor, I love being a huge nerd and getting paid to learn about and think about the future and meet new people every day. And so I think for me, this combination of complex area, getting to work with founders and constantly learning is it's super inspiring. And I think we learn new things from the people we're working with every day.
And we hear you smiling when you talk about it. It's true.
It is fun. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. There's never a dull moment. I really enjoy it.
Okay. Can you please present a16z, your geographic presence, figures funds team quickly, and explain to us how it's organized?
Sure. Yeah. So a16z, we're a venture capital firm. I'm based in the Bay Area. We like to say we have a Silicon Valley mindset, but we are now in the cloud.
How many people are working at Andreessen Horowitz?
I think around 500 people right now. And they're spread across the US.
Okay. And you were talking about your value proposition. So what's your USP?
So I think there are a couple of things that we really, hone in on as values. First and foremost, I would say we're founder friendly. That's when Ben and Mark started the firm in 2009. They had a collective set of experiences with VC. They looked at the Valley and they're like, we need to build a firm that's really defined by the respect for the entrepreneur and that we're set apart from others in how we work with founders in the company building process. So what does that mean? First, obviously, it's the way we just carry ourselves, how we work with founders, how we embody those values on a day-to-day basis, and how our leadership has just been very close to either having founded companies themselves are close to founding stories and has a deep sense of empathy. But I think the second piece, which is truly unique, is the operating platform. So the firm, I'd say 70 to 80% of the firm is actually these operating teams, and they're experts in fields that help supercharge our companies in areas that support company building. So we have technical and executive talent, we have people practices, we have go-to-market, and a lot of other firms may have like one or two recruiters or a community person or a couple of people on like their ops platforms, but we've really invested in this, and these folks are really the experts. So our people practices team, everyone there has been a VP of people, the technical talent and the executive talent, all those people have been executive recruiters or technical recruiters. They really know their stuff. And the idea is we're providing sort of access to expertise and insights across all these areas to our portfolio companies.
So it's a sort of factory.
I think of it this way: as we're looking to back the best founders. They would be amazing founders without us, and we're really there to be the coaches that are supercharging them to help them with all of the company building that takes them in the early stage from 0 to 1, and at the growth stage as they keep going, and really just helps them go faster.
And to identify the deals, did you develop AI solutions to ping exactly at very early stage companies and to be the first point of contact of those entrepreneurs?
Yeah, without commenting too much on our investment process, I think there's a lot of data that we consume as part of our diligence process, and we're constantly refining that.
Okay, so interesting to have also your opinion on Europe, and because you start to invest in companies in Europe, it's quite recent, if I'm not mistaken. How does the startup ecosystem in Europe mean for?
Yeah, so we are looking to find the best founders wherever they are. So we truly believe that companies can be built anywhere, and are super optimistic about the founders that we're meeting in Europe. And so over the last 18 months, we've made a handful of investments in Europe, and we're looking for a lot of the same things we'd be looking for in any other geography around founder ambition, their earned secret, their prepared mind. And I'm happy to dig into what those concepts look like. But we look for many of the same things in Europe as we do anywhere else.
And do you have the intention to open an office, as some US VC investors already did?
Yeah, right now we don't have an office. Things could change in the future, but for now, no office.
Okay. And then, so as I said, you already invested in European companies. I'm thinking of Stoic, of course, because you were the partner in charge of Stoic. Can you please present, and Stoic has already been on my podcast, so maybe there is no need to go into it, but can you present a few companies that you currently support in Europe?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So you know Stoic well. There are a couple of others I'll touch on that we've invested in Europe. One is a company called Sequence that is based in London. They are focused, again, in the payment space on the billing collections process, working with SaaS companies around how they're able to collect billing, do it smartly. Because right now, essentially, if you're a SaaS company, you have to manually invoice companies, you have to reconcile the collection of that payments. You have to match it against your pricing sheet. You have to then also match it against what the Salesforce login says, and it's quite messy. And so even just the process of collecting payments is quite painful. And Sequence is focused on that. And it's a team of repeat founders, one who came from Onfido and another who had started a company called Feeder in the UK. And then a second company I'll talk about is Payrails, which is a company based in Germany. It's a team that came out of Delivery Hero to build payments infrastructure. They are focused on more of the merchant acquisition side, focusing on orchestration, integration, and managing for, say, a big marketplace that has multiple payment gateways they work with. So it could be an Adyen, a checkout, et cetera. Stripe, being able to sort of manage and route payments across these different gateways, being able to collect cash, and then also, I think, reconcile payments across these various inputs and into the ERP. And I think that's a team we backed because they had built this software within Delivery Hero. And I talked about this concept of an earned secret. They definitely know their domain and are operating in a space they know.
Excellent. So 3 companies, correct?
Yeah, we have others as well. So one of my partners led an investment into Wise many years ago. Our enterprise team has a handful of investments as well. These are just a couple of the more recent ones we've done out of fintech.
Okay, perfect. An element that we didn't see with you is the kind of patterns that you focus precisely when you're talking about the entrepreneur as central in your investment decision. Except the team, what are the other elements that you bear in mind, that you really focus on?
Yes. So I talked a little bit about tailwinds. And so a lot of times we look for things where there's a shift in the market. I talked about default global. So this shift in the market towards cross-border and also companies being built globally to start. And as you may know, we're investors in Deal, which enables companies to hire and pay a remote workforce, which is a tailwind we've seen particularly out of the pandemic. There's a number of other tailwinds. I talked about AML compliance as being one, or cross-border payments. Any of this stuff is all tailwinds. And I think that's one area. STOIC is another. I think the need for cyber insurance is growing in the market. I think overall, we also look for clear pain points, big markets. I think sort of the standard things you probably hear about in venture. I think a lot of it does also come down to team, right? So you mentioned team, but I think we look for people who know what they're operating in a space they know well, and then they're able to materialize labor and capital around them. So they're able to recruit the best people and bring the best people on board, often people who are better than themselves and able to fundraise. That's also an important part of the equation.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to conclude, can you take 5 minutes to tell us what your next steps are?
Yeah. And by next steps, you mean in terms of things that we're excited about in Europe or anything you want me to dive into in particular?
Yeah, I was thinking of rather a new fund or a new vertical that you would like to, or a new area, a new region.
Yeah, totally. I think there are lots of things that we're spending lots of time on. I mentioned, I think the CFO stack, there's a lot to be still built. I think for me, I also spend a lot of time looking at vertical software. What does that mean? Software that's specifically purpose-built for a particular industry. I'm invested in a company in the US that's doing that for the freight industry. We have another one that I've worked on that's in payroll for entertainment companies. I think there are a number of industries that still are lacking great software tools or have legacy services businesses that are waiting to be turned into software. And there's some really interesting tailwinds too if you start getting into areas where, things around climate tech or energy efficiency or other areas that or payroll and distributed workforce, all of that can intersect with vertical software. Default global, as I mentioned, is another theme that we're excited about and we're excited to spend more time on. And that's everything from hiring, finding vendors, setting up your accounting entities, et cetera, so that you can be default global from day one. Yeah, and I think those are a few themes that I'm excited about. I think these are all falling still very much into early stage fintech. And we work with our partners in crypto, as I was mentioning, Web 2.5 or healthcare payments, and really pushing the perimeter of where fintech could operate.
Okay, thank you very much, Seema. We're just on time. Do you have a book recommendation for us?
Yeah, I love to read when I have time. And one book that I've really enjoyed recently was Madam President. It's a biography of Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who is a former president of Liberia. It's an awesome leadership book to see someone who's really persevered through some very challenging times. And just, I think that constant aspiring for the future comes in a lot of different forms. And a lot of times political leaders can be a great source of just people who tend to be inspirational in the past.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
See you soon.
Bye.
Thank you all for listening and sharing this moment with us. Don't hesitate to contact me on Twitter or LinkedIn to share your comments and reactions. You can also rate this episode on your favorite podcast platform. See you soon.